Welcome to the Twisted Nightmares Chronicles, your home for haunting horror stories, paranormal mysteries, and terrifying urban legends. We bring original horror tales that will keep you up at night, blending psychological horror, supernatural elements, and eerie realism. If you like what you hear, please like, comment, and subscribe for more chilling content. Just like this. Also, please turn on notifications so you never miss a new horror story. Also, subscribe now to the Twisted Nightmares Chronicles and follow us if you love creepy horror stories that feel too real. Unsettling towns with dark secrets, haunted houses and ghost stories, and paranormal horror, psychological thrillers that mess with your mind, found footage, no sleep, and eerie, unexplained events. Want more horror? Check out these videos. Cursed House in the Woods, True Horror Story, the town that never lets you leave the whispering shadows, a paranormal encounter, unsettling neighbors, a strange humming, a town that never sleeps. What happens when your dream home becomes a nightmare? What if your new neighbors aren't quite human? When we moved to Richmond Heights, a small town near Orlando, Florida, we thought we found the perfect home. A stunning Victorian house with a wraparound porch, original hardwood floors, and a price too good to be true. But as we settled in, we realized something was horribly wrong. The locals watched us too closely, not out of curiosity, but like we were outsiders invading their secret world. They barely spoke to us, yet their eyes never left us. The town itself felt stuck in time. The shops stocked strange, off-brand products. The children behaved like eerie mannequins, and the streets were silent. But the worst part is the humming. It started as a faint sound at night, a low vibration that made our bones ache. Then the townspeople started walking in perfect unison to the church. Our kids, Tyashia and Legend, began sleepwalking at 3 a.m., whispering in a language we didn't understand. My wife, Cynthia, stopped wearing bright colors and started speaking in hushed tones. The symbols carved into our porch railing weren't random. They were warnings. No one in town seemed to age. The library records had entire decades missing. And when I tried to leave, the road was mysteriously closed. Something in Richmond Heights is changing us. The longer we stay, the harder it is to remember why we were afraid. Now, they're at my door, watching, waiting, calling me to join them. Please watch until the end. And whatever you do, don't ignore the humming. If you love scary stories, unexplained mysteries, and psychological horror, then this story is for you. It will send chills down your spine. Inspired by real-life urban legends and classic horror themes, this story captures the fear of isolation, paranoia, and the unknown. Perfect for fans of The Backrooms, The Twilight Zone, No Sleep Stories, SCP Foundation, found footage horror, and creepypasta. If you've ever wondered about a town that was hiding a terrifying secret, then this story is for you. Here's my story. I should have trusted my gut when we first drove into Richmond Heights. Something felt off about this neighborhood from the moment we passed that faded wooden welcome sign, its paint peeling to reveal darker wood beneath it, like an old scab ready to fall off. The housing market in 2024 had been brutal, and when we found this beautiful Victorian home in this small Orlando neighborhood for less than half of what we'd pay in the city, it seemed too good to be true. Now, I know why. We moved in during late September, when fall was just starting to show its colors here in Orlando. My wife, Cynthia, had fallen in love with the wraparound porch and the original hardwood floors. Our granddaughter, Tyashia, 12, and our grandson, Legend, 7, were furious about leaving their friends behind. Well, at least I'm glad they stopped giving us the silent treatment when they saw their new bedroom, with its bay window overlooking the garden. The first strange thing I noticed was how our neighbors watched us unload the moving truck. Not the casual glances you'd expect in a small town, but intense, unwavering stares. They stood in their yards or peered through windows, barely moving, like they were studying every box and piece of furniture we carried inside. When I waved, they would slowly raise their hands in response, but their expressions never changed. During our first week, not a single neighbor came by to welcome us. In a town of barely 2,000 people, this seemed odd. When Cynthia baked some cookies and took them next door, Mrs. Henderson accepted them with a strange, tight smile and hands that trembled slightly. She spoke in whispers, her eyes darting past Cynthia to scan our house repeatedly. She asked what felt like innocent questions. How long we planned to stay, if we had family nearby, whether we followed any particular faith. But there was something about her intensity that made Cynthia uncomfortable. Tyashia and Legend started school the following morning, and that's when we noticed more peculiarities. The other children were polite but distant. They worked together in class, but never played during recess. They all wore similar clothing, nothing identical, but all in muted colors, no logos or patterns. When Tyashia wore her bright yellow sweater and Legend wore his black leather jacket, their classmates stared at them as if their clothing was offensive. The town itself seemed frozen in time. The small main street had shops with windows that were slightly too dusty, selling items that looked just a little outdated. The grocery store stocked brands I'd never heard of, with packaging that seemed off somehow, like knockoffs of real products. The locals shopped methodically, never browsing, never chatting in the aisles. One evening, about 3 weeks after we moved in, I was walking our dogs, Sky and Miami, when I noticed something bizarre. Every house on our street had lights on, but no sound came from any of them. No TVs, no music, no voices, just silence. Sky and Miami started growling at something I couldn't see, the hair on their backs standing up. That's when I noticed all the houses had their curtains open, and in each window, people stood watching me. Not sitting, standing, just staring. I hurried home, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being observed. That night, I heard a low humming sound coming from somewhere in town. When I looked out our bedroom window, I saw people walking down the street in the darkness. Dozens of them, moving in perfect unison, all heading toward the old church at the center of town. The next morning, no one in town mentioned the midnight walk. When I asked Mrs. Peterson at the dollar store about it, she looked at me with those same empty eyes I seen everywhere else, and she said she didn't know what I was talking about. But her hands shook as she rang up my purchase, and she accidentally printed my receipt 3 times. Tyashia and Legend started having nightmares. They said their classmates would sometimes stop moving completely during class, like mannequins, even stopping mid-sentence. Their teachers, Mrs. Collins and Mr. Cruz, would also freeze. Then they resume as if nothing had happened. When Cynthia contacted the school, they said Tyashia and Legend had an active imagination and suggested we have them talk to the town councilor, Dr. Reed. We declined. The changes in our family were subtle at first. Cynthia started speaking more softly, her normally vibrant wardrobe shifting to grays and browns. Tyashia and Legend stopped complaining about missing their old friends and began sitting silently in their rooms for hours, staring out their windows. Even Sky and Miami stopped barking at squirrels and instead watched the street with suspicious eyes. I found strange symbols carved into our porch railings one morning. Not vandalism, but old marks that had been painted over many times. When I scraped away the layers of paint, the symbols seemed to pulse faintly in the early morning light. That same day, I noticed similar marks on every house in town, all carefully hidden under paint or behind vines. The humming sound became more frequent, sometimes at night, sometimes during bright daylight. Each time, the townspeople would walk to the church. Each time they denied it the next day. But I started noticing other things too. How no one in town seemed to age, how the dates on the newspapers in the library's archives jumped mysteriously from 1957 to 1973 with no explanation, how there were no births or deaths recorded in town records for decades. Last week, Tayasia and Legend started sleepwalking. I found both of them standing in our front yard at 3 a.m., swaying slightly, mouths moving silently. When I brought them inside, they had no memory of it. The next night, I caught them doing the same thing. Their eyes were open but empty, like the eyes of every other person in this town. The humming is getting louder now. It's no longer just at night. I can hear it all the time, a low vibration that makes my teeth ache. Yesterday, I found Cynthia, Tayasia, and Legend standing in front of their mirrors, practicing blank expressions. They didn't acknowledge me when I spoke to them, and this morning, they all wore gray. I'm writing this because I need someone to know what's happening here. The internet connection has been getting worse. Pages load slowly or not at all. Our phones only work sporadically. The road out of town was closed last week for, quote, repairs, but I drove by and saw no construction equipment. I've started seeing things in the corners of my vision, shapes that shouldn't be there, movements that don't make sense. The townspeople watch me constantly now, their eyes following me everywhere I go. They know I know. This morning, I found that symbol carved into my bedroom door, fresh and raw in the wood. Cynthia, Tayasia, and Legend didn't come down for breakfast. When I went to check on them, they were standing at their windows, staring at the church. They turned to look at me in unison, their faces smooth and empty, and spoke in voices that weren't quite their own. They said it's time for me to join the town. The humming is very loud now. I can feel it in my bones. There's someone at my door, knocking with perfect mechanical precision. I can see more townspeople gathering outside my window, all staring up at me. Their faces are changing, shifting into something that's almost human, but not quite. If you're reading this, stay away from Richmond Heights. If you see a house listing that seems too good to be true, it probably is. And if you hear a low humming sound late at night, run. Run before you start feeling the urge to stand at your window and watch. Run before you forget what it was like to feel anything at all. They're coming up the stairs now. I can hear them, moving in perfect synchronization. The humming is in my head. It's getting harder to think. Harder to remember why I was afraid. Maybe I should just open the door. Maybe I should just join them. If you've made it this far, you've heard the whispers. You've felt the eyes watching from the darkness. But are you sure you're still alone? Richmond Heights isn't just a story. It's a warning. If you ever find yourself in a town that feels off, if the silence is too deep, if the people watch but never speak, run. Before you forget why you were afraid. The Twisted Nightmares Chronicles isn't just a channel, it's a gateway. And now, you've stepped through. They're watching you now. Like, comment, and subscribe, if you dare. Thank you for venturing into the unknown with us on the Twisted Nightmares Chronicles. If this tale sent shivers down your spine, then stay tuned to uncover more twisted tales. Have a haunting of your own to share? Drop it in the comments below. Until next time, keep listening, but be careful what you hear and see.